Today we're going to tackle a huge topic, the war in Ukraine, but from an angle you probably never expected, management theory. It sounds a little strange, I know, but a really fierce debate among academics shows how the very tools used to run a business might, just might, help us understand and maybe even prevent global conflicts.
So, picture this. You're at a big conference for management scholars. The war in Ukraine is on everyone's mind. And then, one researcher gets up and says something just incredibly bold. They claim that their research actually gives them the tools to understand the whole situation. Well, as you can imagine, that kicked off a passionate and very divided debate that really exposed a major problem in their field.
So the first expert jumps in. She's from the world of organizational behavior, so she's looking at this through a microscope, basically. For her, it's all about the individual. You just have to analyze Putin's leadership style, his personal motivations, what's in it for him. She argues it's a classic case of one person's behavior driving this massive outcome.
But of course, someone immediately pushes back. They argue, whoa, hold on, you're completely missing the forest for the trees here. This is a macro problem. It's about nations acting like giant corporations, fighting for resources to get a strategic edge. It's about the high costs of dealing with rivals like NATO, and it's about that classic agency problem, where a leader's goals are totally different from the goals of their own citizens. And just when you think it can't get more divided, it does. The debate completely splinters over how you should even study the problem. One scholar says we need to do in-depth interviews, get the historical context, the qualitative stuff. But another one counters, no, we need hard quantitative data. We need census records, trade databases, things that show the real patterns.
So the result of all this expert debate? Absolutely nothing. A total stalemate. They couldn't agree on the cause, they couldn't agree on what was happening, and they couldn't even agree on how to research it. And because of that, they had no recommendations, no path forward. This failure, it perfectly illustrates a much bigger problem, one that's best explained by a really old story.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll start with that ancient parable, then we'll break down all those different theories. After that, we'll look at how we might combine them to see the whole picture, how to test that new approach, and finally, why any of this actually matters in the real world.
You see, that stalemate at the conference calls to mind the ancient parable of the blind scholars and the elephant. You've probably heard it. In the story, each scholar touches a different part of the animal. One gets the trunk, one gets the tusk, another a leg, and each one comes away with a completely different and totally wrong idea of what an elephant actually is.
And that's the whole point, right? None of them were technically wrong. A trunk is kind of like a snake. But because they were only experiencing their own small piece of the puzzle, they all missed the larger truth. And those management scholars? They were doing the exact same thing. Each one was grabbing onto a piece of the problem but missing the full, complex reality of the conflict.
Okay, so what were these different parts of the elephant that the scholars were describing? Let's break down the fragmented, separate theories they were all using.
Basically, there were 5 big competing theories on the table. A couple of them were zoomed way in, focusing on Putin as an individual, his leadership style, his personal incentives. The others were zoomed way out, looking at Russia as a whole nation, its quest for resources, the gap between the leader's goals and the citizens, or even the economic friction of dealing with an organization like NATO. Now, each theory sounds plausible, right? But not a single one is enough on its own.
And what's happening here is that these theories fall on opposite sides of 2 huge cracks that run right through the entire field. First, you've got micro versus macro. Are you studying individual people, or are you studying entire nations? And second, you have qualitative versus quantitative. Do you find the truth through stories and interviews, or through statistics and databases? The scholars are just stuck in their own camps. Each one of these perspectives is what the source calls a unit theory, and you can think of it like a highly specialized tool. A hammer is great for nails, but it's totally useless if you need to turn a screw. Each theory does a perfect job of explaining one tiny piece of the puzzle, but it's completely incapable of describing the whole elephant. So if all these isolated unit theories are the problem, then what's the solution? How do we stop arguing about the tusk versus the tail and actually see the whole animal? Well, the answer seems to be in a new, much more integrated way of thinking.
The proposed solution is something called programmatic theory. Now, this isn't about creating another theory to compete with the others. Now, think of it more like a master blueprint. It's a structure designed to organize all the other useful theories. The goal is to take the proven parts of each one and fit them together into a single, coherent, and much more powerful explanation.
So what does a programmatic theory actually do? Well, it does 3 really crucial things. First, it integrates. It keeps the strong, validated parts of the old theories and just tosses the rest. Second, it defines boundaries. It makes it clear which theory is best for explaining which specific part of the problem. And finally, by doing all that, it gives us a far more complete and powerful explanation than any one of those single theories ever could.
But here's the catch. A new theory is just a cool idea on paper until it's been tested against reality. And you can't test a brand new kind of theory with the same old, divided methods. You're going to need a whole new toolkit. You know, way back in 1981, a researcher named Joseph McGrath made this incredibly profound point. He said that every single research method is flawed. Every single one. Whether it's doing interviews or analyzing big data, each method has its own biases, its own blind spots. So relying on just one is like deciding you're only ever going to look at the world through a telescope. Sure, you'll see distant things with amazing clarity, but you're going to miss everything that's happening right next to you. So what do? The solution is triangulation. It's just a fancy word for using multiple, imperfect methods together to get a much more trustworthy answer. You use the telescope and the microscope. You do the interviews and you analyze the data. By layering all these different perspectives, the flaws in each method start to cancel each other out, and that gets you much, much closer to the truth.
And this new approach has to work on multiple levels too. A war isn't just one event. You've got these top-down pressures from big economic blocs, like NATO, pushing down on countries. And then you have bottom-up pressures from citizens pushing up on their own governments. A truly complete picture has to show how influence is flowing in both directions at the same time.
Okay, so let's bring all this home. This might seem like a pretty deep academic exercise, but it has profound, real-world consequences. The whole goal here is to make management science genuinely useful in solving some of the world's biggest and most urgent problems.
The path forward, then, seems to involve two key steps. First, we have to prune the theoretical landscape. We need to stop creating endless little competing theories and start integrating the best parts into stronger, programmatic ones. Second, we have to embrace new tools and test these bigger theories using a combination of different methods at different levels.
And the ultimate goal here is impact. It's about moving from academic gridlock to actually providing clear, comprehensive, and genuinely useful recommendations to the leaders and policymakers who are making decisions that affect millions and millions of lives.
And that leaves us with a final and pretty powerful question. The parable of the blind man and the elephant is a story about the limits of our own perspective. But the lesson from these management scholars might just show us a way forward. If we can learn to combine our different perspectives, to integrate all our specialized knowledge, could we finally see the whole elephant? And could that holistic understanding be the very thing we need to understand and maybe, just maybe, prevent the next global conflict? Thanks for watching.